Welcome to Grappling with the Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making. Help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues to better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Jonas from Goldson, and I'd like to welcome my guest. With me today is Scott Mason, also known as the Myth Slayer. He's a speaker, podcast host, and coach working with executives and entrepreneurs to magnetize and monetize professional freedom by dislodging toxic myths to ignite the charisma within. Mark O'Brien is founder and principal of O'Brien Communications Group, a B2B brand management and marketing communications firm, and host of The Anxious Voyage, a syndicated radio show about life's trials and triumphs. And Kirsten Yurich is an organizational performance management consultant, peer leaders group chair with Vistage Worldwide Incorporated, and adjunct professor of education at Felicia University. Thank you all for joining me today.
Thank you.
And here is our topic. Revenue from state lotteries goes to support a host of social causes, including education, environment, and veterans, among others. However, Fortune magazine reported last year that, quote, the average adult living in the poorest 1% of zip codes spends almost 5%, or $600 annually, of their income on lottery tickets for the analysis. Those living in the wealthiest 1% of zip codes spend only $150 on tickets, amounting to 0.15% of their paycheck. Writing for National Review, Ben Conley argues that the lottery is essentially a tax on the poor, observing that, quote, if you eliminated serial ticket buyers and states took only money from people who bought a lottery ticket once a year on their birthday, state lotteries probably wouldn't even cover their costs. He goes on to argue that gambling is a vice. It is not a social good. It is not an individual good. One of the roles of the conservative in society is to frown upon vices, to enforce social stigma against those activities that harm both the individual and society. Whether or not you believe that adults should be free to make their own choices about their money, including choosing to waste it on sports betting or lotteries, every conservative and even libertarian should agree that the states shouldn't be profiting from a vice. We recognize that drug addiction undermines the health of our society. Is gambling addiction different? Should gambling be allowed, or at least controlled like drugs? And if not, does it then matter if government profits from it? The floor is open.
So much in there.
Yeah.
I have to say, the first thing that goes through my mind is the conversation that I think you shared today, Jonason, that we had a while ago with Kimberly Davis, in which she raised the notion of presumptions of virtue. And when I hear words like waste and vice, those are clearly judgmental terms. And I wonder, in this discussion and in considering the people who buy lottery tickets, what do we do with things like choice, free will, and hope?
Well, thank you all for joining me.
And so it's presented as a tax, right? It's presented as revenue for the state. And it's generated by whoever goes and buys it. And so I think are we judging it by its intent or by its impact? Right?
Ooh.
Is it intended to be as lopsided and upside down as it is? But we know its impact is it's upside down, right? In its impact, right? The people who spend the most money on it. So one of my questions in terms of how we might think of process or systems or in companies, if you were to design it today, would you design it exactly as it is right now? And so if we were to create a tax, would we create a tax by the state to tax the low 1%, 5% of their income, and the top 1%, 0.15, 0.015, whatever Jonathan said?
Are we
Is that by
presuming,
design?
are we presuming, Kirsten, that we who will create this program are employees of the state?
Who typically creates the tax code?
I would have imagined that. So
Right.
I would like to ask this question. Have you ever heard, and this is one of the 20 million reasons I love language, have you ever heard the term escheat? ESCHEAT.
Mm-mm.
Sky, it's one of the reasons I asked before we went live if you were an attorney. It's a common law doctrine that transfers the real property of a person who has died without heirs to the crown or the state. Unclaimed or abandoned property is transferred to the state government when the rightful owner cannot be located or when there are no identifiable heirs. So I'm sure we've all seen television commercials where people say, you may have money coming to you.
Yeah.
What do they call it? Unclaimed property.
Mhm.
I know this because I had a client that made unclaimed property software, and that business exploded at a point at which failing state economies recognized that they could derive revenue from the unclaimed property. And there is now a thing called NAPA, the National Association of Unclaimed Property Administrators. So the reason for my question, Kirsten, is
Mhm.
if we are employees of the state, and one of our objectives, if not a major objective, is to try to generate revenue for the state,
Mhm.
I think I know what we're going to do.
Mhm.
There were a couple of things about the characterization that whoever that writer was used with regards to the lottery and its impact on society that I thought were a little bit unreasonable. And what we're talking about goes as to that. First of all, he described the state, quote unquote, profiting off of basically what are sin taxes. The state doesn't profit. The state doesn't profit. Revenues that go to the state go back into society. It's not like people get bonuses when there are greater taxes or anything like that. So let's have some foundational clarity as to what actually is happening with the money here that goes as to what we're talking about vis-a-vis the intent and the impact. Many of the benefits that that the state uses the money that it receives go to the very low income people that are spending their money here. The other thing that I found problematic there was this assumption, two assumptions in that. First of all, that it was the role of the conservative to basically look down on or to foster basically a moralism on the society's part. I don't know that I agree that that's solely the province of conservatives. Liberals, for instance, might say that things like, I don't know, racism are moral evils, that they can be very aggressive about policing. But even leaving aside that sort of statement, the idea that embedded within that gambling is inherently some sort of moral vice, I don't know that I even agree with. To me, as you mentioned earlier, Mark, there seemed to be some judgmentalism there. Who is anyone to sit up and say that's a vice and we need to protect you from it? To me, this goes as to almost like a conservative version of what people accuse liberals of doing all the time, which is creating a nanny state. Oh, let's protect you, you little idiot that doesn't know anything about how to manage your money or can't make any choice, and we're going to remove the opportunity to do this. Gambling can be addictive, but so can food. We don't have people saying, let's not sell food anymore because, people spend money on music. Back in the days when there were digital copies of records and tapes and CDs and things like that, that could be addictive. There were people that were known to hoard those sorts of things. No one ever said, oh, we've got to stop selling records because people get addicted to buying those, and we as a society need to stop that evil. And that sort of thing is going on here. If this is something that generates a public benefit, not a profit, but a public benefit from the revenue that comes to the state, and the state isn't objecting to it and people are willing to spend their money on it, why is anyone getting bent out of shape about this at all?
I was thinking of editing the quote a little bit. and I didn't. Maybe I should have. National Review is considered one of the most conservative news outlets. I happen to like them because the fact that they're anti-Trump conservatives just gives them a warm place in my heart. But so he was talking to his audience, um, and people who generally were saying what you're saying, Scott. And there's the conservative position usually is let people do what they want.
Yeah.
I think his argument here is that when it's state sponsored, let people do that what they want. That's his objection. I think your point is highly relevant. That when you talk about the income goes to the state, that's a bit of a canard because if the state is spending it on social programs, then it is going back into the system. I think we could reasonably ask how much of the actual revenue from the lotteries goes into these programs and how much is going to, in governmental overhead. I think we could ask that. And I also think that it's worth considering that the people who benefit from the programs most are then the ones paying into the programs, which means that they're actually losing their actual dollars to get benefits that are more intangible, which may ultimately not be in their own best interest.
Yeah. I,
Hmm.
I'm also of the understanding that the transparency in how those funds are used is lacking, right? So we are missing a little bit of the picture in terms of where all of the dollars go. And there's a little bit of a fox in the hen house scenario in terms of the advertising. So if the state sponsored aspect of this is I need people to buy more, then I am going to use the advertising methods that I won't use the word prey for Scott's benefit that are most likely to work on the audience that is most susceptible to them.
Yeah.
And so the advertising that is out there uses the cognitive distortions, the biases, and the puts the ideas into the prospective buyers' heads around that take it. I'm going to say take advantage of the situation that they're in, combined with the biases, and creates the ultimate buyer out of somebody who is, the large majority of the people buying the tickets is not in the position to spend the money on it, right? And so I think that's where some of the bad rap in my mind is going to come from, is that if I'm out there advertising in ways that's going to make you more likely to engage in a behavior that is addictive because it benefits me to get more money out of the person that is more susceptible, that's going to start going down, a dark path.
Why? Why would you say that? And people are adults. Infantilizing an adult population, we could go on a whole bunch of side tangents about that, but the infantilization of our adult society is very much arguably a lot of why we have a lot of social problems that we have right now. People aren't able to take care of themselves. People don't need to learn the skills that they need to in order to take care of themselves. People are extraordinarily fragile around a whole host of issues because we as a society have felt that they need to be taken care of and protected from their own ability to think. Maybe we as a society would be better if we said, okay, you are responsible for thinking, and if it hurts you, well, that's on you. Learn to think a little bit better. You've got a brain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know if this is cynical. It might be. I don't mean it to be, but in doing a little bit of reading before we came on, I saw these things referred to as a regressive tax, a poverty tax,
Mm-hmm.
and it's interesting to think about the fact that Mitt Romney essentially tanked his presidential campaign by pointing out that, at least according to him, 47% of the United States population doesn't pay any tax. And I wonder, I don't think that states are thinking, oh, well, here's how we can get our pound of flesh out of those folks.
Here, we'll get around that.
That would be the cynical part. And when we were talking earlier, Kirsten, about, if we were creating this program, if we didn't want it to do what we're talking about it's having done, what would we do? Assign some kind of income limit? Well, you can't buy a ticket unless you can demonstrate that you make over X dollars. A, that's not going to work, and B, it would be utterly counter to what you just pointed out correctly is the advertising for these things.
Right. I guess I'm curious, like, why does the state have to sponsor it? What if it was private?
Well, because the state needs the money, that's why.
Mm.
It just so happens I published a piece on my Substack today about Connecticut's economy.
Mhm.
I mean, unfunded liabilities are going to sink this state.
Mhm.
But you would never know that
Do you have a
from
budget at least? We don't even have a budget. Maybe
I,
today we got one because, God forbid we get shown up by the federal government. But
even if
we don't
someone said we had a budget, I wouldn't believe it.
even-
But if you were to listen to the governor or anyone else on the local news, you would never know that we're in the hole we're in.
Mm.
So it's all about, and I'm going to continue to have to wrestle with Scott's point because Scott's correct. We're never, the state is sponsoring this to get money, but we're never going to know where that money goes.
Mm-mm.
Scott, you really got me thinking. I felt there was a little bit of fun, and you mentioned it in your first remarks that it seems like conservatives and liberals may be trying to figure out which side of this issue they're on.
Mm.
You're absolutely correct. There's no question that there has been an infantilization of society. Now the question becomes, now that so many people are infantilized, what do we do about them? Okay, I'm in education. I'm trying to raise a next generation
The
of
bar.
people, and I just submitted my own article today, about why snowflake is such an appropriate pejorative for so many young people today, that they melt under the slightest incandescence. And I mean, we just had grades due this week. Oh my gosh. What teachers go through with kids coming to them,
Yeah.
in minor and major hysteria fits about their grades.
Yeah.
I'm trying to raise kids to be more independent and self-confident and self-sufficient. What do we do about the people who are already infantilized? Do we just say, sorry that you didn't have a system and you didn't have parents that raised you to be more thoughtful, responsible, independent, but you're just going to have to figure it out? Or,
Well,
do we
that's
now
one
have a
option.
responsibility to look after them?
Mhm. Oh, I think maybe that question was for Scott. I don't know, but how does the community benefit if the community doesn't act like a community?
That's a really good question. That's a mic drop.
What do you mean by that, though, Kirsten?
And I think there's such a lack of community in our communities where we are in such isolation. Our families are in isolation, our individuals are in isolation. We do not live, raise our children, and rely on each other as in tribes anymore. We just this concept of going it alone becomes a badge of honor, and I think there's serious detriments to our society when we don't embrace a community aspect of relying on each other when we are in weak moments and reaching out when we are in strong moments to the people that are around us. And I think that can have a nuclear, example at small times and a meta example for larger communities and aspects of the topic.
I will say that to the extent, for instance, that lottery monies would go to having in place social programs that keep people who may be going through exactly what you mentioned, a bad time, would have some sort of safety net, so they don't end up dead or literally living on the street, panhandling, all of that sort of stuff, starving, that sort of thing. That being said, I also feel like what role the community has to around what do we look out for each other, and is an ethos of community tied to a certain level of care or protection that goes above and beyond what one would normally expect for people to receive as fully functioning adults, and then stepping into, I don't know, living like you're in this city of seven domes from that 1970s movie, Logan's Run, where everything is literally taken care of you, is part of the debate that this seems to be hitting at. Going back to Jonassen's point about snowflakes and the ability to melt, I'd hate to sound so Darwinistic about this, but a society can't sustain itself if it is in a position where its own citizens are not able to deal with volatility and shocks. And thinking about this purely from an evolutionary perspective, I don't mean to sound like a total monster, although I might, but there is something to be said for the fact that those that are able and willing to stretch and do whatever they need to understand that making it or surviving in a society requires using their brains or brawns or whatever talents or skills that they have, and not just relying on each other's, ultimately makes that society stronger. And so the whole idea of protecting people from a tax that some people view as exploitative of them, even though it goes to the entire state, is to me one of those things that ultimately weakens society. And I would say, I don't know whether you even express an opinion about this, Kirsten, but for a community, for a society to be strong, its individuals have to be strong too. A strong society cannot exist if it only has people who are fragile.
Jonassen, I remember a conversation that you and I had one time, and I don't remember the setting, but Melissa Hughes was involved in it. And we were talking about the fact that even if our motivations are suspect, if we appear to be doing good things, that might become contagious. And there's Jonas knows this, but there's a group of people who gets together every Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern, and it's called the Friendship Bench, and we have conversations about who knows what. But last week's conversation was actually quite inspiring, because one of the things that came up was the supposed elimination of SNAP benefits because the government was shut down. And Melissa Hughes, again, Jonassen, lives in what she called the Naples bubble in Florida. And they live in this affluent community. And she said right outside this community, there's a public school that's attended by mostly Hispanic people. And by Melissa's initial accounting, all of the people within her bubble don't want to have anything whatsoever to do with that. And Melissa decided that she was going to bite a bullet, and she was going to canvass the people within this bubble and try to raise gift cards for a local supermarket to donate to this school. They ended up generating $3,700 worth of gift cards for this. And another gentleman who lives in, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Arundel County in Maryland, he and his peers got together and did a food drive to help people who were relying on SNAP benefits. So, Scott, I absolutely agree with what you're saying about our infantilization. But I also think that, given what you said about a society depends on strong people and weak people, there may be stronger people, more strong people around than we maybe give ourselves credit for, and who are willing to step up when the government is not doing what the government is expected to do. And to your question, Jonason, about how do we counter this trend, I think one of the things that we're contending with politically, nationally, is the fact that after you've said yes for long enough, you can't say no. People are not going to tolerate being said no to. And I think, as a corollary to Scott's point, I think we've raised expectations about the level at which the government is going to, quote, take care of things or take care of us, that people get irate when it doesn't happen or doesn't turn out to be true.
Mhm.
And I think that ties in very much with your point, Kirsten, about a community acting like a community. And thank you for sharing those
Yeah,
examples,
great example.
Mark. It's, you reminded me of a story I heard quite a while back, that this group, they went to people, they showed them a picture of someone who looked, I guess, Middle Eastern, and said, this is a child who doesn't have enough to eat, is living in a refugee camp. And if you make a donation of whatever it was, something, not huge, $100 or something, you can feed her for whatever it was, a day or a month, whatever it turned out to be. And then that was how they presented it to some people. And to other people, they presented exactly the same script with exactly the same picture. And they added one line. They added, she is one of many refugees in this state. And there was a dramatic decline in what was given when they added that line. Why? Because if I feel like my giving is making a difference, I'm much more inclined to give. If it's one person, great, I can make a difference in one person's life. But if it's hundreds of people or thousands of people, then whatever I give is a drop in the bucket. What's the point? And certainly from a Jewish theological perspective, it's exactly backwards. It's my responsibility is not to fix the world.
Mhm.
My responsibility is to do my part.
That's right.
And simply by doing my part, I certainly transform myself and I make a contribution to the world and I set an example that other people could follow. And that's a very positive, measurable contribution.
Mhm.
But it's really a question of where is our mindset? Is it on my responsibility to do what I can?
Mhm.
Or is it on, am I making enough of a difference for me to feel that it's worth my while?
Ooh.
Yeah. I love the example you gave there because it illustrates a cognitive bias or a distortion, right? As is what they manipulated in adding that sentence. And those are the same mechanisms in place when someone goes to buy a ticket and thinks, I've lost the last 15 times, I'm due. It's the same mechanism. So we can use the word infantilism, which I can't even pronounce. But I think that I think it's the wrong word, because I sit with CEOs hours and hours and hours every week, and they fall prey to cognitive biases and cognitive distortions every day. And we don't call that infantilization. I can't say the word, right?
Yeah.
But if we put it on a socioeconomic status individual that's very different, now we're using this word that demeans them. Mechanism is the same. It's a cognitive bias. It's a cognitive distortion that they're falling prey to. I just want to point that out.
But if there was data that the CEOs were contributing disproportionately to the number of lottery sales, would we be as upset about it?
Yeah, that's not the point I'm making. I'm just making the mechanism that is functioning on the individuals that are buying more tickets is the same mechanism that functions on the individuals who gave more or less on that experiment, or on anybody that, every day we all fall prey to some type of cognitive bias, a confirmation bias, a recency bias, primacy bias, authoritative bias, like there's 100 of them. It's the this population is falling prey to 4 to 5 that are specific to gambling and are pushed through the advertising. They are literally used deliberately in advertising to apply those biases. And so whether there's something about that population that makes them more susceptible, I don't have data on that. But the mechanisms in play are the same, and we all fall prey to them. But what we're seeing the impact is now this system is out there advertising using these variables around these distortions. And now we see the impact of it is we see a disproportionate impact to a population. And now what are we going to do with it? That's the question. Do we like the impact? Do we not like the impact?
Kirsten, is your point that the CEOs are more insulated from the consequences of these cognitive distortions?
No, I'm saying it's the same mechanism in play. We're just seeing it played out at a higher magnitude in this population with the lottery as our example.
Right, but are the people in the corner offices, are they less affected significantly in their quality of life than the people who are down on the streets?
I think it's an experimental question. We don't. There's causal and correlational data here. We don't know why the top earners are buying the least amount of tickets and the lowest earners are buying the most.
But I will say this, and I want to defend my use of infantilization here.
At least you can pronounce it.
Well, barely, which is that the reason why we infantilize, why I feel like the sort of idea to somehow protect the poor from the consequences of their cognitive biases is different than the mere expression of the cognitive biases that the same cognitive biases, as you say, that the CEOs have, is that no one is saying, oh, those poor little CEOs, we got to protect them from their own decisions. No one says that. So we don't treat the CEOs as needing this sort of coddling, whereas we are saying by dint of this scenario that the poor, at least arguably, would need that sort of coddling. And that's why it's not that the cognitive biases are any different. I think that, you know, obviously a lot more about that than I do, but I am more than happy to concede that the cognitive biases are the same, but how we're treating the two populations. In fact, one could argue that by infantilizing the poor, we're actually engaging, and this hadn't occurred to me until you sort of threw this out, in a sort of classism, which is, right, that CEOs and rich people don't need to be protected because they are inherently smarter or better or capable of functioning more, but the poor, well, you know, they can't handle things on their own. So let's that can be argued to be extraordinarily classist.
That could be a bias as well, right?
I also think there's.
Give me a second, Mark, if you would. I want to follow this up, Scott, and maybe I can tie it back into your original remarks from the beginning, Mark, if we have time. We all agree we need a safety net. There are people who need to be protected. Yeah. At some point, we as a society have to make a judgment call. When do we cross the line or the expanse, moving from safety net to infantilization? And somebody's got to make those decisions. And so this is why I'm taking it back to your initial remarks. You mentioned our conversation with Kimberly Davis in the episode that posted yesterday. And you know, and the issue raised is how can, or who's allowed to, or should we define virtue? And I think that's just another judgment call. I think we have to, and I think we do.
Or vice.
Whether we call it that or not. I mean, we have laws against murder and theft. Yeah. Those are things that most people don't argue are not acts of virtue.
Right.
When you get into things that are much more gray, and certainly when you get into people's religious sensitivities and their cultural sensitivities, now there's a lot more room to argue what's a virtue, what's a vice, and who gets to have an opinion about where to draw that line, but we are drawing lines. It's like this term,
Yeah.
non-judgmentalism.
Mhm.
I know what it's supposed to mean,
Right. But
and I know what it should mean,
yeah.
but what it doesn't mean is don't make judgments.
Right. That there are
Because
no
we all
lines.
make
So
judgments all the time, and we have to
there
if we're
are
going to
lines.
function as individuals and as a society.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Good fences make good
One of the
neighbors.
things I was going to say in response to what Scott was saying is that, and then a whole bunch of other dots started to connect. There is money is a terrific insulator. So, to the point where the folks in the corner offices don't have to worry as much. It won't be as affected by, negative economic things. And then I started to connect that to virtue because I think sometimes we equate wealth to virtue. And I wonder, to go back to your point, Kirsten, if some of the advertising isn't a carrot and stick kind of thing, because it all of the advertising shows people who've apparently hit the lottery
Hmm.
having great times and arguably anyway appearing to be virtuous.
Right.
So, back to what I said at the beginning about hope. I mean, maybe some folks who are buying lottery tickets are thinking, dang, I mean, if I hit the big one, I can be safe, I can be protected, I might even be virtuous.
If I want to be happy, I better win the lottery. I mean,
Well, there you go.
I was
That
pumping
too.
gas on the way home and it said, be merry, buy the ticket or win today or something. I'm like, oh, well, if I want to be merry this Christmas, I better buy a damn lottery ticket on the way
Yeah,
home.
happiness is part of it too, for sure.
But but they don't advertise the stories of the people who win and their lives are destroyed,
Heck
which
no.
is a high percentage of
Yeah.
people, right? Those stories don't make it out. So we have a false sense of reality. We publicize only the positive. We make it look more available. It's skewed in terms of what's actually happening. And then we tell them, if you want this, you have to do this. Everybody, the message is out there for everybody, and I don't know the mechanism of why it's disproportionate.
Well, when it comes to the whole idea of what is a virtue and what is a vice, and what the government and the advertising behind it actually then are using the advertising and the messages, as you mentioned in particular, I want to focus on this around hope, Mark. There is and there are continuing cultural assumptions that we have about even whether things like hope are virtues or things that a government should encourage. Now, Jonason mentioned in the introduction, what I talk about is Greek myths as a business leadership and inner transformational tool. In Greek myths, humanity was given the gift of fire. Zeus, the king of gods, was angry about it. He created an artificial human named Pandora, a woman, sent her down to earth and made her promise never to open a jar that she had with her. Of course, being a human-like being, she had curiosity. She opened up the jar, and every evil, plague, disease, cynicism, apathy, war, all of the things that cause human beings to suffer came out of that jar. Pandora slammed the jar shut, keeping hope inside. The message around that, why would Zeus put hope into a jar full of evils? Because hope itself is controversial as a virtue. The ancient Greeks viewed hope as an evil. Are we, even if we're saying that the government should not be promoting vice or should not be promoting feeling states or actions or behavioral triggers that are evil, there's an argument even that promoting hope is evil. And are we as a society used to grappling with these sort of ethical, almost metaphysical questions when we think about what we want to promote or not? And to me, that's a lot of why I tend to really want to pull back on the government making these assessments, because I don't know that I think that hope is something one way or the other, or hopelessness for that matter, the government should be promoting all the time.
Wow.
There's a lot of things I wouldn't put in the hands of the government.
Yeah. And Jonason, I got the sense maybe before we went live that you thought maybe Scott and I might be on opposite sides of some fence. Scott, one of the things I would like you to know about me and being infantilized is I'm still scorched that the law tells me I have to wear a seatbelt.
Yeah. Now, a child, that might be a different story. That might be a child, an infant, right? Might be someone that we are justified in infantilizing.
Well, agreed.
But it's right. Maybe it's a different story. I hadn't really thought about that, but that's actually a good example. I want to think about that. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
it does really lead us to a question that I don't think has an answer, or at least not a good answer, is how do we instill personal responsibility in people from a young age if so much of our culture is projecting messages that are that are in contradiction to that? I mean, what is advertising? It's all, tapping into our visceral responses, trying to manipulate us with instant gratification, making promises that they're not going to keep. The algorithms are set up that way when we consume media. Everything's working against us, and it's working against us by design because that's how people make money. And so we are programming ourselves into irresponsibility, and we've been doing it for a long time. And the question is, what are we going to do about it? Is there anything we can do? Is this just cultural inertia and it's too late? And we just have to wait for enough lemmings to go off the cliff before the rest of us can sort of figure out that's not a great idea and pull back. I mean, boy, I'm not sounding like myself today. So your comments about hope, Scott, I think we're going to talk about that in the backstage portion here.
I think our political system doesn't work for us, and we have a real inability to change anything of substance. Right? There's plenty of countries that have real change in some of these areas in terms of social media for kids. Not advertising drugs on television that get us in trouble with all kinds of things, and they I don't know. They're willing to make a stand on some of these things, and they can reverse them if they're the wrong choices, but at least put something in place and find out.
And with
We don't
creativity,
even
I
put
mean,
anything in place.
I was in Hong Kong in 1981. Um, Everywhere you looked, billboards, sides of buses, tops of buildings, this pair of eyes, woman's eyes, with the caption, Hong Kong is watching you, don't litter.
Hmm.
Now, apparently, Hong Kong had been one of the filthiest cities in the world. And when I was there, it was pristine. It was like one of the most effective campaigns in history.
Social engineering.
It sounds very Big Brother, but I don't think it is because
Just behavioral science.
Hong Kong wasn't really watching me. Right? Hong Kong was reminding me to watch myself.
Right. And each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was just behavioral science at work.
Yeah. And to be able to make such a profound cultural change in such a low-tech way, I think is inspiring.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Problems can be fixed.
Yep.
If you have the creativity and the will to do it.
Were you in Hong Kong long enough to know if the eyes were watching you and you littered, what the penalties would be?
Well, it never occurred to me to litter, so I didn't.
So I was not willing to test it.
Smart man.
Listen, this has been a really, really engaging conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to thank all of you.
Did we solve it?
Yeah, well, we rarely solve things here, but at least the hope is by engaging in the conversation to get the juices flowing, to get the thoughts out there, to try to raise the conversation because you don't find too many conversations like these on cable news.
Amen.
Yeah, even if our audience is not quite that big,
Yet.
yet.
That's the right word. I use it all the time. Yet.
Just to encourage our audience to continue these types of conversations.
Yeah.
Talk to people that you don't necessarily agree with, civilly, thoughtfully,
Yeah.
and try to find a meeting of minds, or at least be able to respect different points of view. That's why we're here. If you are a premium member, you will have access to the backstage conversation, which will continue momentarily. And for those of you who are watching and listening, if you have an idea, a topic you'd like us to take up at some point, please go to my website, ethicsninja.com, use the contact information. If it's a compelling topic, we'll take it up in a future episode. But for now, thank you, Scott Mason, Mark O'Brien, Kirsten Yurich, for a very, very thoughtful and energetic conversation. Until next time, always keep grappling with the gray.